Welcome to Evilive, the live media commentary show that answers the question, are idle hands the devil's workshop? Subscribe if you're new to the channel, because today we're reviewing Season 1 of Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. So my initial thoughts on this series, I don't have any emotional connection with this. I never read the graphic novels or the comics when they were released. Originally, I was in high school, I think. And everyone around me, I had a bunch of gothic friends and, a bunch of sort of what would be termed as, nerds and geeks nowadays. That's where I, sort of hung out with. And they were like hot and bothered by the Sandman. It was like the thing everyone was into. And I was just sort of on the outside watching going, I don't really get the draw. I don't really care. I was always more interested in traditional fantasy than what this is. However, once I saw that it finally made a live screen adaptation, I had to check it out, if for no other reason than for nostalgia of my youth and to try to understand what all of my friends were freaking out about when I was younger. Again, this was more years than I'd like to admit ago, but still, now that it finally made it out, I had to check it out. So it took me a while to get through all the episodes. I think there's like 11 of them. But here we are. So this is directed, all the different episodes together, by Mike Barker, Jamie Childs, Marazi Almas, Andres Bays, Coralie Fargeet, Louise Hooper, and Hisco Hulsing. And the episodes were written by Neil Gaiman, David S. Goyer, Alan Heinberg, Jim Capolongo, Austin Guzman, Ameni Rosa, Lauren Bello, Heather Belson, Alexander Newman Weiss, Vanessa James Benton, Jay Franklin, and Catherine Smith McMullen. I want to call everyone out because they all did a great job. This is not my favorite series ever created, but I did enjoy it. So I want to make sure to give some props to people who spent so much of their time in life. I mean, we, as consumers of media, we don't really think about what it takes, the devotion and the forsaking of your family in order to create these things. We just consume them and binge them and discard them after we're done. But it takes serious time and effort to create this stuff. And so I want to call people out, and give them the props they deserve. This premiered originally on August 5th, 2022, with all episodes being available to binge on Netflix. Okay, so the creators made significant narrative changes from the source material with Gaiman's approval. Heinberg said that everything needs to get Neil's eyes and his feedback. So this, allows you to believe that it was, although there were changes, approved by Gaiman, and they wanted to make sure that he had his stamp on everything before it went out. This just helps fans. That's really all this comes down to. The fact is, if a story beat or if a combination of characters or events serves the story better than it was originally presented, well, then change it. Because ultimately, you want the best version of the story possible in order to be told on screen. And again, these were comics. They're not exactly literary masterpieces. And so you have to adapt what is visual originally with less writing into more of a speech delivery platform with visuals. And that's not very easy. And so they clearly got, approval and everything through Gaiman. Okay. So working on writing a second season of The Sandman has already begun. So they clearly saw success and they were happy with what they got. And they should be, because it was entertaining. Dave McKean, who created the covers for the comic series, came out of Sandman retirement in order to design the credit sequences for this series. I'm a big fan of credit sequences. I think they can be just text scrolling, or you could put some effort and thought into them. Traditionally, this is done by a graphic designer, but I'm really glad that they went back to one of the original cover artists and asked him to contribute to this live adaptation of it. It just adds a little bit more of that authenticity to what Sandman was to what it is being portrayed as now. Tom Sturridge, who plays Morpheus, reveals that Neil Gaiman told him on his first day of filming to stop being Batman with his dialogue. Because Sandman is very sort of just, like closed off, and he has these sort of one-liners, and he doesn't really have long monologues. It's just, yes. Apparently he was being a little too Batman with his delivery. But he's just closed down physically, very like tight-lipped and very small. It's not like he's like moving or anything like I do when I do this stuff, which is weird, but he's Sandman. What are you going to do? He's one of the Eternals. Every episode is named after an issue of the comic series, with the slight exception of 24/7. But the original comic version of it was 24 hours, so it's not far from it. And there's just another little nod to the fans of the comics, giving them their props, saying, hey, we're paying attention. We're not trying to do anything different. We want to homage as best we can what you love. And as a fan, I love that. Let's be honest, these things will not get made, ever, if there's not a promise on the other end of making money, or a hope on the other end by the producers or the studio of making significant money. So they're not created for fans. Let's say this. They're greenlit for money. They're created for the fans, generally. Not always. And so it's always a corporation backing it unless it's some independent thing. And in this particular case, it's Netflix is just throwing money because they have money to throw. The cast, and I'm going to truncate this to the core characters that, spend the most time throughout the 11 episodes of this season. Tom Sturridge is Dream, or Morpheus. He's the personification of dreams and nightmares and the ruler of the dreaming. Boyd Holbrook is the Corinthian, who's a nightmare who escaped the dreaming, and I'll get into that in a second. Vivienne Arkampong as Lucienne, the library of the dreaming, and caretaker in Dream's absence. And then Patton Oswalt actually voices a raven called Matthew, who's the dream's emissary to the real world, which is interesting. So the entire setup is that Morpheus rules. He's one of the Eternals. Neil Gaiman does this really wonderful thing of blending our own human lore and history and filtering it through this sort of fantasy lens, and then, spitting out with his own little flair on the other side of it. American Gods I read the novel originally, and I absolutely loved the novel. I thought it was great. Watched the series and liked the series as well. I thought they did a great job expanding on the novel and, making logical changes where they needed to. And I was unfortunate the series ended up being cut short, but still, it was great. And so, I've watched Coraline. I loved it dearly. I love what Gaiman can do. I'm more of a Clive Barker fan myself, but still, I love Gaiman's work. He's clearly a talented individual. But this blending that he likes to do, like with American Gods, it was all the different pantheons of gods. And the idea is as long as there's people to worship you as a god, you will continue to exist. But as soon as people stop worshiping you, you're no longer in existence. They sort of play that trope in this universe too. So it's probably a shared universe that he's going for. They deal with some gods and some demons and stuff like that in this, but their existence is very much at the whim of human beings who then will worship them or not. And so in Neil Gaiman's sort of multiversal universe, humans are the center of everything. Even the endless, which is like dream and despair and desire and stuff like that, and death. These are these ideas that have these physical manifestations or spiritual manifestations that allow them to be anthropomorphic and sort of interact and exist. They dwell without the need of humans to believe in them to exist like the gods do, but they exist solely to serve humans. So again, humans are the center. And we're led to believe throughout the course of this season that there have been other worlds, other realities that these Eternals have served. And in one particular case, because of a vortex, that entire world was destroyed. And so they had to, refocus on this one that we're currently living in. And so it creates this sense of lore and immersion in a world that, yes, is fantasy, but it's not too far removed of believability. The suspension of disbelief is not as much of a hurdle as, say, watching dragons fly through the sky. So it is very much grounded from the human aspect of being human. But then they throw in stuff like occult lore, which for me, I love me some occult. I just adore the occult. Everything from stuff that I disagree with to stuff that I really agree with. I just love the idea of ancient wisdom being passed down through the ages of mankind. And, the majority of it's all complete and utter horseshit. all of it, but it's still fun for me. I just love the idea of it. I love the iconography of it. I love the aesthetics of it. Our first episode into this entire season is just that. It's this magician who ends up capturing, by accident, but capturing Morpheus, the Sandman, or Dream, as he's also known. And he imprisons him for hundreds of years. So not only is he, ends up dying, but his son and his wife end up, keeping him contained or whatever. But he eventually gets out, and then his whole point after he gets out is to hunt down his necklace, his mask, I'm trying to remember because it's been a little while, and his bag of sand. And those we're led to believe are his sources of power. But we never see him use any of them except for the sand, but not in the bag form. It just comes out of his hand. He never uses his mask again, ever. So I can't really recall whether or not it was destroyed or there was some sort of line that said why he didn't need to use it anymore. But because that was a story arc for 3 or 4 episodes, it's weird that he just stopped referring to them after that. And so the way that this entire series is set up is there's these mini arcs, like these story arcs that may or may not pass through multiple episodes. And in some cases, like with the Corinthian, for example, it's a repercussion that a lot of dreams or nightmares escape the dream realm because Sandman was captured by this human occult magician. And so no one was controlling the dreaming. And so the librarian sort of stepped up and tried to do her best, but most people just sort of went out on their own. And so not only does the Sandman have to recollect the items that give him power that he never then uses again, but also he has to go recapture all of his dreams and nightmares that were escaping and get their Tuchus's back. So that's kind of the premise. But aside from that through line of a story, we're getting this sensation of episodic one-off adventures, which if you ever read the Hellraiser comics, I love them so much because of their episodic nature. And even the later films, though the quality of them suffered because they were just trying to push them out to make a buck, the concept of them I thought was great, is that Hellraiser is eternal. The Cenobites are eternal. And so it's just the stories of individuals that come into contact with the Cenobites that's sort of the center and focus of the story. And so in this, Sandman's eternal. It's just the characters that come in contact with him that give you the episodic plot lines and stories. And I actually really like that take on something like this, where you have this being that can't really be killed, even though technically they could, through the machinations of other Eternals, which is another plot point of this. But ultimately, it's just them interacting with the current characters. And you get characters like Constantine, who's a woman in this, comes down from a long line of Constantines, probably the original Constantine or whatever. You get Vortex, which is just this basically someone who can break down the walls of reality and dreaming and sort of intermix them together, which are direct consequences. There's B plots about the Corinthian, who is a nightmare who turns into a serial killer, develops his entire serial killer cult following, and goes to be like this convention speaker, and he gets wrapped up with the Vortex and stuff like that. And there's this wonderful story episode where it's the Sandman just interacting with a person. He's talking with death, and the idea that everyone has to die and they would choose to die because living life too long would be worthless. And so he tests it with this one guy, and the guy lives hundreds and hundreds of years, and every few years they meet together in an inn, and he talks to him about what he's experienced in the last 100 years, and they get through this little fight and they become friends. But it's really about not so much about the guy living forever and sharing those ideas. It's about Sandman learning what it means to have a friend, to be friendly to humans, and to learn to appreciate humans for who and what they are. And that's interesting when you take it on the concept of this is an eternal being who is created just to serve humans, learning to appreciate humanity, which is essential if your entire job is just to serve them, I would argue. So it creates this very interesting dynamic between the Eternals, between themselves. I mean, you get to meet Lucifer, who is just I'm a big Lucifer fan. I mean, this entire show is built around the idea of devils and stuff and evil. Just tongue in cheek, having fun with it. But I love me some devils, and the fallen angel Lucifer, the Morning Star, is number one for me. I just adore it, and it's being portrayed by a woman. I don't care. I like the woman. I can't remember her name for the life of me, and I didn't make a note because I'm an idiot. But she does a great job in the role. She was in Game of Thrones and is Brie of Tarth. I can't remember. And then she was in Star Wars as Captain Phasma, who had a book written about her, which was infinitely better than both of her on-screen appearances in the sequel trilogy. Just putting it out there. So she does great as Lucifer, and you can see that there's machinations and wheels turning behind the scenes of the Eternals. Everyone, for some reason, doesn't like Dream, Morpheus, Sandman, and they all want to make him pay or suffer in some way for some reason. I guess that's going to be a huge part of the second season. But the humans you interact with, there's this little element of fantasy with them and horror and occult, which I love because that's the people that I grew up with. That's the people I surround myself with, are sort of, people who are into the little darker tent of reality and try to have fun with life instead of just, 9-to-5ing it and just living as like a worker bee, basically. I liked weirdness in life, and this show showcases those types of people, and I just felt comfortable around it. I loved it. I really, really did. My favorite part of this entire series has to really come down to the idea of the lore that Gaiman puts out there. I love the idea of Eternals. I love the idea of gods being at the mercy of humans. Eternals must, having to protect humans and serve humans more than anything else. I love the idea of humanity being the center of power, even if they're not the most powerful in the universe. You know what I mean? I think that's an interesting concept. So I really appreciate Gaiman's ability to weave a universe, a rich, diverse universe in reality. My least favorite part about this is that because it was so episodic, there didn't seem to be any real consequences for anyone, really. As Dream went on, he became more and more patient and willing to look past sort of rule breakers and, dreams that would, sort of go out on their own, and he sort of forgave them and stuff. And I don't know, I want my Eternals to be a little more stoic and less human. Dream became much more human than Eternal in this series, and that kind of bugged me. I like the idea of him sort of being beyond humanity. You know what I mean? So ultimately, giving this thing a rating, this entire series, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 evil eyes. I did enjoy it. I do like it. I will watch the next season, but it's not much TV. It's not one of those things where I would suggest you go binge it right now. The fact is it's entertaining, it's interesting, it's engaging. If you have some connection with Sandman, then I would highly recommend you go check it out at your earliest convenience. If not, you could probably skip it and you wouldn't really miss out on too much, but it is, for someone like me who loves the occult, loves the idea of realities and dimensionality and, sort of eternal beings and stuff, you're probably going to enjoy it. So check it out. And that's kind of all I got for you. This is a very short season review. I didn't want to do an episode by episode breakdown. I just wanted to give you my vibe on it and tell you what I really loved about it and what I didn't. So check it out if you're into that thing. And if not, go check out House of the Dragon because that's killing it right now. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And always remember, evil spelled backwards is live. So get out there and be evil.